Well, folks, it looks like it's the beginning of the end for Highguard, as we recently learned that Wildlight Studios, the development studio behind Highguard, has laid off most of its staff. So Highguard was revealed back at the Game Awards 2025, and Jeff Keighley showcased it as the big finale because he really liked the game when he checked it out. In fact, Highguard was originally planned as a shadow drop, much like Apex Legends, and this being a game being developed by folks who worked on Titanfall and Apex Legends. I suppose, they were trying to do something similar in that vein. But Jeff Keighley approached him and was like, hey, do you want this slot for the Game Awards? Do you want to be the big finale for the show? That would turn out to be a big mistake. The PR was very negative because ultimately people were not super about the art style, and the game, while it seemed to be trying some different things here and there, overall looked pretty generic and like another hero shooter, another live service, a genre that can be very fatiguing if not done right. From the December 11th, 2025 announcement, Highguard would go radio silent. And all the while, feedback surrounding the game continued to be extremely negative. And then finally, 3 days before launch, on January 23rd, 2026, they finally posted a launch trailer, a launch showcase that provided an overview of this gameplay experience, presenting what they call a PvP raid shooter that was inspired by raiding bases in survival games, all while blending with high-paced action and gameplay elements from titles such as Overwatch, meeting Apex Legends, meeting Rainbow Six Siege, meeting Counter-Strike / Valorant, among other games that it clearly took inspiration from and remixed. 3 days later, on January 26, 2026, the game would launch to overwhelmingly negative reviews starting out, but then as more people play the game, eventually that score rose to mixed with a 46% score compared to the initial 17%, but 46% is still not a great score. And while people admired Highguard's attempt to try something different, ultimately it felt like this game needed more of like a playtest from players instead of shadow dropping as a final launch, because it felt a little more bare bones than it should be at launch. It felt like the game wasn't quite as well balanced as it could have been, with one of the main complaints being that the game launched as a 3v3 experience, even though the game felt suited for bigger teams due to the map sizes. Now, there was some optimism due to the fact that developers worked very quickly to listen to feedback. So just 4 days after launch, they announced that an all-new 5v5 limited time mode would be playable. That's extremely quick work that you normally don't see from live services. And then after the reception surrounding 5v5 was so positive, they actually kept it as a new permanent mode. And they'd also add new content like a new base, and then we'd see episode 2 release on February 6, 2026 with a new Warden econ, so a new playable character alongside other content additions. But ultimately that would prove to be not enough, as you can see right here from the Steam player numbers. While it did do decent numbers at launch with a peak of over 97,000 players due to the Game Awards spotlighting the game, and also people being really curious to see how Highguard would do given all the negative reception surrounding its marketing, the end result would be that player numbers very quickly plummeted. You can see right here the release of 5v5, and you can see where some content drops happened and whatnot. But generally, the trend has been downwards, and the last 24-hour peak we saw was just a little over 3,500 players. And so, yeah, that's the lowest we've ever seen it. Highguard lost 80% of its player base in 24 hours, and significantly more throughout the next few days and weeks. And while this is no Concord 2, a lot of people did check out the game at its all-time peak. Highguard's declining numbers ultimately hinted at a live service that was kind of decaying, that was dying off. And this being a free-to-play game that doesn't charge any money at launch, its monetization is entirely dependent on a large volume of players enjoying the game, engaging with it, and then spending money on microtransactions. But with such a low player base, there was no way that this game was making enough money to make this a sustainable business model. You can see right here the numbers look extremely unhealthy, and there's just no coming back from this. And that is especially true with reports coming in that Highguard developer Wildlight Studios has laid off most of its team, which means that Highguard is only now being maintained by a skeleton crew. And all this happening just a little under 3 weeks after the game's launch. That's an incredibly poor sign. Now, while we're on the topic of health, that brings us to the sponsor of today's video, Factor. Fresh, never frozen, nutritious, wellness-focused meals that are conveniently packaged, easy to prepare, eat, and dispose, and deliver right to your doorstep. I've been spending a lot of time at the gym lately to focus on getting in shape, but diet is half the battle. And when my schedule gets busy, I don't always have the time for all of the prep, cleanup, and macro counting involved with cooking from scratch. That's where Factor comes in. Just 2 minutes in the microwave and you'll have a delicious meal ready to enjoy. Most recently, I tried out the truffle butter filet mignon, and yeah, it is as good as it sounds. The steak was juicy, fresh, tender, and pink in the middle. The butter potato leek mash was exquisite, and the cooked carrots were a perfect accompaniment. And this was just one of many high-quality meals. Factor offers a ton of variety with over 100 rotating weekly options, including salads, breakfast, shakes, snacks, and more, all made from real, high-quality, nutrient-dense ingredients that fuel energy, performance, strength, recovery, and overall wellness with a smart balance of carbs, healthy fats, and protein, plus at least 2 vegetables per meal for added nutrient density. Not to mention the various meal plans on offer to fit your dietary practices, whether it's high protein, low carb, keto, and more. Factor also takes great care in excluding less healthy ingredients such as refined seed oils, refined sugars, artificial colors, sweeteners, and much more. Eating for wellness, fitness, and dietary goals doesn't have to be painful or time-consuming, nor does it have to break the bank. To get your own Factor meals, head to factor75.com or click the link below and use code YONGYAFB50 to get 50% off your first Factor box plus free breakfast for 1 year. That's code YONGYAFB50 at factor75.com to get 50% off plus free breakfast for 1 year. All right, so let's talk about the mass layoffs that occurred at Wildlight Studios after Highguard ultimately failed to perform. Alex Granner here is a level designer who posted the following on LinkedIn just yesterday on February 11th, 2026. This post right here reads, "Unfortunately, along with most of the team at Wildlight, I was laid off today. This one really stings, as there was a lot of unreleased content I was really looking forward to that I and others designed for Highguard." So 2 things to note about this statement. One is the fact that most of the team at Wildlight has been laid off, which means that there's no way of supporting Highguard in a sustainable manner. They no longer have the manpower to support a live service like Highguard. And then there is the fact that Alex talks about unreleased content I was really looking forward to, almost as if suggesting that it's additional content that we will never see in the future, stuff that was still being worked on. But now, with most of the team at Wildlight being laid off, that content will forever remain unfinished and unreleased. And it feels like Highguard as a live service is basically already starting to wind down. And this is not the only developer who posted on LinkedIn about their layoff. Josh Sobel here, lead tech artist at Wildlight, or former lead tech artist, posted the following. "Today, I was laid off from my job at Wildlight, along with most of the staff." So this is the second time we're getting confirmation that most of the developers at Wildlight are no longer with the studio and that the team has been completely gutted. Next up, we have Jeffrey Tucker, former gameplay engineer at Wildlight Entertainment, who said, "My journey at Wildlight was short but sweet. Unfortunately, I was impacted by today's layoffs." Next up, we have Derek Bentley here, former environmental artist for Wildlight, who posted, "Folks, friends, colleagues, today I was impacted by layoffs at Wildlight Entertainment." And for good measure, here's one more individual, Jesse Y., former senior software engineer for Wildlight, who posted, "Sadly, I was laid off from Wildlight Entertainment today. It was an absolute pleasure working with the team, but bittersweet as it is, I look forward to whatever's next in my journey." And of course, eventually media outlets started to reach out to Wildlight Entertainment for confirmation about the layoffs. And eventually, Wildlight Entertainment would come out with the following post confirming that the mass layoffs indeed did happen. Now, they try to present some hope when they say here that the game is not going to die, that there are still some folks left to keep up with the game, but like the writing's on the wall at this point. There is no way that Highguard will survive this, and I don't think there is a way that Wildlight will survive this, but I suppose only time will tell. In the meantime, we have this statement from Wildlight, quote, "Today we made an incredibly difficult decision to part ways with a number of our team members while keeping a core group of developers to continue innovating and supporting the game. We're proud of the team, talent, and the product we have created. We're also grateful for players who gave the game a shot and those who continue to be a part of our community. Now, they don't specifically say here that most of the team was laid off, unlike the statements we saw on LinkedIn, but I'm bound to believe the LinkedIn post more from the people who actually worked at Wildlight, who have no reason to lie about the fact that most of the team did in fact get laid off. Though Wildlight Entertainment does kind of hint at it with this bit about a core group of developers continuing on supporting the game, which almost sounds like a skeleton crew. It sounds like a very minimal group of people. Doesn't feel like the team right now is big enough to actually finish and make new content for this live service, which is what it needs to keep bringing players back. This right here is as red as a flag can get. People are looking at this whole situation, and everyone just about is concluding that, yep, Highguard is pretty much dead. This is a live service whose support will end in the short term, and we will likely see a shutdown announcement in the not-so-distant future. It simply does not have the player numbers to support itself. Wildlight's coming out here saying that they're going to keep supporting the game so that the remaining players don't just flee the title, but it's very obvious that at this point, if you spend money on Highguard and its microtransactions, you're practically throwing money away because Highguard is just not long for this world in this ever-competitive live service landscape and market. A lot of folks are not particularly shocked by this development. Once we saw those player numbers peak and then nosedive as quickly as it did, it was just very difficult to believe that the game would come back. Like, that level of a loss of players, what it highlights is that players are checking out the game and then leaving because it's ultimately not interesting enough to dissuade them from their existing games that they're already playing. Now, since all this has happened, we've seen a number of folks in the games industry provide statements like Jeff Keighley here, who tweeted that a large part of the Wildlight Entertainment team that worked on Highguard has been laid off just 16 days after release. An unfortunate, brutal, and sad outcome for a game I enjoyed in early playtests. Now, there are a lot of people saying that Jeff Keighley was responsible for killing Highguard by hyping it up so much at the Game Awards by making it the big finale, which is what kickstarted a wave of negative PR for the game. But I would say that while that didn't help the marketing of the game, ultimately, almost 100K people showed up to check the game out, and with the game being free, there was every incentive to continue playing it if it was actually really fun, if it was actually really engaging, and really nailed it at launch. But the fact that it lost players as fast as it did ultimately highlights that the reason Highguard really failed was because the game just didn't live up to its full potential. Like, it had some really interesting ideas going for it, but the execution was just somewhat lacking. And again, I think its biggest mistake, more than anything, was not doing like an alpha or a beta or some kind of playtest before official launch to be able to make all of those adjustments and to be able to take player feedback and really kind of hone in on what the right balance is of things for Highguard to really work in a way where people feel that Highguard shines beyond just like a temporary bit of fun. How to tune Highguard in such a way where it's something that becomes an addictive experience for people that they are happy to come back to. At the same time, I do believe that putting Highguard as the big finale of the Game Awards elevated the expectations surrounding it to like top tier AAA level, whereas if it had been shadow dropped under more humble circumstances, it would have been seen as like a AA release that's making a really great attempt that people would look forward to seeing where it goes. I think that perception shift that happened because of how it was featured at the Game Awards did make a difference. But I do think if ultimately Highguard had been like really, really, really fun, no matter how much negative PR it got during its marketing campaign, those, almost 100,000 players who did, get curious and check the game out would have stayed. But what's wild to me is how little headway Highguard had to make a comeback. Now, did I think it had potential to make a comeback? Yes and no. Like, the quickness and swiftness of the updates, like adding 5v5 a few days after that feedback came in, was kind of like a positive sign. But at the same time, the player numbers dipped so heavily that I wondered if, as a free-to-play game from a brand new studio, this was sustainable for even like a medium term. But as it turns out, the current numbers are so poor that Wildlight Studios had no choice but to lay off most of the team. And that's just a little under 3 weeks after launch, roughly 2.5 weeks after launch. And that's the risk you take with live services, especially free-to-play live services. You're either a mega hit or you die, like slowly or quickly. And that's why I think it was a huge mistake for Wildlight Studios to immediately pursue a live service as their first venture an endeavor. They should have, I think, set their ambitions a little more humbly and, I don't know, maybe gone for a Titanfall-esque single-player campaign experience, something a little smaller scale so they can build over time. Just going immediately for a free-to-play live service as your first game in such an oversaturated market and with a type of game, a genre of games that is so difficult to succeed in from a business and financial perspective, that was, I think, not the right choice. But yeah, a lot of people are calling the situation basically Concord 2 due to the fact that the game died so quickly. Again, Concord was still much worse, but Highguard is roughly in that realm when it comes to it serving as a cautionary tale. But yeah, we've got opinions like this one from Synth Potato, who said, people losing their jobs is never a good thing. Higher-ups in this industry need to understand people do not want games like this anymore. Invest in creative ideas, new story games, new co-op games, new worlds. This has been Concord 2 when it could have been avoided, and instead the team who worked on Titanfall could have made something people want to play rather than what would make money on paper. Think Titanfall successor, like a spiritual successor. I think that would have been the way to go. I genuinely believe that Wildlight was host to incredibly talented developers. I just think they all worked on the wrong game, on the wrong type of game. Here's Nick Tech here saying that Highguard didn't fail because everyone jumped into the hate train, because ultimately, yeah, almost 100,000 players showed up. They just didn't stay. That's the issue with live services. You either have to be extremely successful and retain a player base, or you lose player count, constantly creating a snowball effect, leading to game servers being mostly empty. Also, the Game Awards didn't do the game any favors. Right here, we have a really balanced take expressing that Highguard isn't quite as bad as some people are making it out to be. It's certainly not like slop, and, it had potential, but it just failed in a number of areas. It just didn't stand out enough from the pack. It wasn't visually unique enough, so on and so forth, and ultimately the gameplay balance at launch wasn't nailed. But yeah, so right now, Wildlight is suggesting that there's a small team still supporting the game, but that's akin to how Concord, when it initially shut down, was we're evaluating options for the game, almost like giving hope that it might be able to come back, overhauled or something. But, I knew that would just not happen. It was not worth the investment because of how poorly Concord did. And with this Highguard situation, ultimately, it feels like they're delaying the inevitable. And with the layoffs happening, the optics surrounding Highguard are even worse. People have less faith in Highguard now than ever, understandably so. And I think the developers also probably see the writing on the wall at this juncture with how poorly the player numbers are doing. So while officially Highguard is still technically alive, I'll be confident in saying that all this marks the beginning of the end. It is inevitable, I think, at this point that Highguard will die. It's practically as good as dead at this point with most of the team laid off. That is a big major sign that the development studio is not able to keep up with the financial situation. It highlights that numbers are not good enough to sustain Highguard because ultimately it costs a lot of money to maintain a live service like this. So there you have it, folks. That's Highguard, which has come to an unceremonious end. And yeah, that's the brutal market of live services. And you either succeed big time or you don't succeed at all and you eventually fade off into nothingness. I'd love to hear your thoughts and opinions on what you think these mass layoffs represent for Highguard in the comments below. And to be further updated on all things gaming news, reviews, and discussions, stay tuned right here on Young Yeah. I'll see you guys next time. Young out.